Today is going to be really interesting because I know in our last meeting, people were like, "Oh man, can you talk about this?" And so I like, all right, I'm gonna show you what we do to create what we call scalable prompts when we're using ChatGPT. And I don't know about you, but from my perspective, I mean, I know a lot of people harp on ChatGPT, but it's really kind of becoming the iPhone of AI, right? I mean, it's got this whole app store concept in there, which is, how everybody's going to scale. There are other competitors out there. A lot of them just tap into the ChatGPT API. Hey, Art was on and off again. So what we do in our organization is we try to make it so that everybody in our organization can use the prompts. So we create a prompt library, but more importantly, we created a structure to the prompts so that it becomes much more scalable. And the prompts that you see out there, and I was hoping Paul would join us this morning. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But he sent me an email. Up, speak of the devil, there's Paul. Paul's now joining us. So I'll wait. I normally co-host this with another guy named Andy Slifer. Andy is on a camping trip, and last night his dog started barking at something in the darkness. Dog caught the thing that was in the darkness, and it turned out the thing that the dog caught in the darkness was a skunk. So Andy has been doing quite a bit of work to try to clean himself and the skunk off. Hey, Josh.
While camping, I can't think of anything worse.
Oh, God, I know. Can you? Oh, man. But he's got one of those, I don't know, mobile camper things that he can pop up and shower or whatever. But anyway, I just cracked up at that. He shot me that email. He said, "I just can't do it." I'm like, "No sweat." Go clean up. But anyway, what I was going to share, Paul, I'm glad you're on because Paul sent me an email.
I'm sorry. Let me mute these guys.
Oh, no sweat, John.
Jumped on a
You're good.
freaking wet accident. So.
You're right. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you guys all this stuff. So this is really interesting. It's kind of funny because Paul sent me this morning and the timing couldn't have been better because I see a lot of these things. So let me see if I can just bring it up. Okay, so he sent me to this article that was on Upwork, all right? And you see a lot of these where somebody is talking about how to create awesome ChatGPT prompts. I would call these primers, right? And so when I look at them, you can see them. This guy did a good job of just creating kind of interesting categories. This is prompts for fun, for content creation, SEO, marketing, small businesses. But I want you to take a look at the way this is structured and why I would call this a primer, but not a real prompt, because it's not necessarily scalable, because he's got variables in here, but every time somebody in your organization wants to execute one of these things, they would have to fill in these blanks, which means you're basically retyping stuff all over again, right? It would be easier if you had a system to make this something that everybody in the organization already had populated and they could just change a couple of things. And so I learned a technique from a guy named John Benson, and I started to expand on that technique. And we call it dynamic prompt stacking or dynamic prompt sequencing. And so it's just a way to take your prompts and break them into components that everybody in the organization can either tweak or they're standardized. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. All right, so let me see if everybody can see this. Y'all can see this okay, I guess, right? Holler if you can't. Everybody good? And stop me at any point if you have a question. It's pretty small?
Yeah.
How about now?
Better,
but
okay.
Blurred. But anyway,
go on. Yeah, this is supposed to be blurred. Yeah, this is supposed to be blurred. So pay no attention to the man behind.
I thought my eyes were bad. They're bad, but not that bad. Okay, got it.
You're good. You're good. Now, the only thing I will ask is y'all feel free to unmute and talk throughout this, because I'm now in a slide share mode and I can't see anybody. So the way that here's the other screen. I don't know what's going on your side. So, so this is your standard, screen, right? And you've got your prompt area down here. So when you are, let me see if I can get it to work. Yeah. Okay. So you put your prompt down here, and the problem is they only give you a little bit of space. So you don't have a whole lot of room to work in, right? So what these guys all do is they give you a prompt that you're going to put into this little area and type away. And it's a good primer, but you always have to kind of edit those prompts over and over again. Now, prompt stacking on the other end, let me see if I get my slide thing to work. Jesus, is this thing going to, hang on a minute, it's being a pain in the butt. I'm just going to do it another way because I can't make that thing work. So I'll do it the poor man's way. Let's see. I guess we can see that okay. I'll get rid of that. Okay, there we go. Better? Sort of better?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I could probably hide this thing too. It gives me a little bit more room. Okay. So prompt stacking is just creating what we call containers. And those containers are how we create they look complicated on the front end, but when you're running them out at scale, they're extremely efficient. And so these containers contain the variable information that would be inside of that prompt. So now all I have to do is swap out the variable inside of a container. All right, I know this is confusing, but I will get to it. So the containers can be anything you want it to be. We have, for instance, a container that we would call style, which allows us to dictate what is the style of writing that we're going to be using. Like I have a style for my personal writing. If I'm writing a blog post, I have a style for an email. If I'm going to do an email, I have a style for a LinkedIn post. So I have different styles that are just for me. Faith has a style for her. All right. So we have different styles for different purposes. Context is more information that we're giving the prompt so that ChatGPT knows a little bit more about what we're trying to accomplish. URLs is something that we want it to look up. You can name these containers anything you want. The idea is that you just put stuff in there that everybody will understand what that's supposed to be. And then you reference those containers in the prompt itself, okay? So let's take, for instance, one of those from that article. If I were to zoom over here to this article, I'm trying to remember where that particular one was. Yeah, that was a tweet. So let's see, I'm gonna do okay, let's see if I can find the one. Yeah, here we go. The prompt that I was using was create 3 tweets using a descriptor tone of voice, each related to this article, input, content, or URL. All right. So great idea. If we were trying to move that around our organization and have everybody use this, then everybody would have to constantly rewrite this, or they might have to put in new posts, which basically, especially when you get into more of these, you're ending up trying to put in stuff inside of a paragraph. Does that make sense? I'd have to constantly replace stuff inside of a paragraph. That gets a little cumbersome. And especially if I have to do it over and over again, I would rather just have it more standardized. And so that's kind of what we do. And so we would take this thing, and if you look at it, these 2 things are variables. But over here, 3, the quantity of tweets is a variable too, right? So I would actually create containers for that information. So I have style containers, again, that are going to give me the tone of voice. I'm going to have context that's really going to give me more information to tell ChatGPT, because if I just say, hey, go write 3 tweets about this post, or if I were to say, go write a post about this article, then I haven't told ChatGPT anything about what I think. You know, if I have an opinion on the matter, or if I have background on the matter, or if I've done other research on it, I would really want ChatGPT to know that, so that when it writes on my behalf, it inserts stuff that I'm thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're just letting the AI write everything, you know, which is great if you don't care. But if you're really trying to add value, then you need to tell your audience what your position is on whatever it is you're writing. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
John,
So
can I ask a quick
yeah,
question? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Go ahead.
These containers, where do we place those inside of GPT?
Yeah.
Where do they go?
I'm going to show you how.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm going to show you how. We're actually going to break this down. And we're going to create several of them. And what I would love for y'all to do while you're out there is, if you have a prompt on your end that you want me to remaster here, I'll do that for you live while we're here. We would call that polishing a prompt. Okay, so you give me a basic prompt, and that's essentially what I'm doing with this one. I'm going to polish it up to it where it becomes a scalable prompt that you can use inside of your organization, and it matches your needs and your audience. Okay, so this being the prompt, how do we now break it into more components, give it more information? And again, this is just about tweets, but if we're getting into writing, you know, some complex stuff, you're gonna really start to use these containers. And again, I name the container whatever I want at the time. Like, for instance, I'll have one called competitors, and I'll have links to all the competitors' websites. And then I'm going to say, I have a standardized prompt that says, I want you to go analyze these competitors for X, Y, and Z. All right. And so then anybody in the organization has to do is copy that prompt, paste in the new URLs, run it, and it knows exactly what to do, what, you know, how we want it organized, et cetera. Okay. And I'm probably taking the most basic of prompts. That's why I'm saying, if you guys have something in your organization right now, when I'm through with this, throw it at me and we'll show you how to scale it up and give it a lot more depth. Okay, so that being the case, let's go over here and I'm going to show you how I stack it. Okay, so this is the original prompt, right? And if we were to take this, you can see how I'm starting to stack it over here, but I wanted to run it for you so that you can actually see. Yeah. Okay. First of all, because it's pointing to a URL, I have to have Web Pilot turned on, or some other thing inside of the plugin store that's going to reach an external URL. All right. And since I'm just going to be using plain old URLs, I'm just going to use Web Pilot. If I was using like a PDF or something like that, I would use one of the ones that would scan a PDF. All right. Everybody knows how to use the plugin store, I would assume. If you don't, holla. Okay. All right. So now to do this prompt, I have to go in here and I would say, geez, I have to really describe the tone of voice, or I could just use a word. Let's just say we're going to use a casual tone of voice. All right. And then, just for giggles, let's just take the URL of this particular post that we're playing around with. All right. So there you go. If y'all wanted that to know where that is, now you know. I could paste that in the chat too, if y'all want to access it yourself. Okay. So that's the article that we're going to do. We're going to tell it exactly what that prompt said to do. Give it a second. It's got to go scan it, read it, come back and write something. And we're really not judging this particular prompt around speed or anything like that. We're really just kind of getting our head wrapped around what happens the next time we want to use it. What happens if somebody else in the organization wants to use it, right? How do we give it more context? This has no context from us. This is just simply saying, go read this. And in this particular case, it just says, just read an awesome guide on how to write prompts for ChatGPT. Been struggling with this. Hey, folks. Okay. So you see, it gets, kind of cutesy, and you may not want it to write cutesy, right? You may want it to write in a different style. Okay. Can you comment on the plugins? Karen, how do you pronounce it? Corinne, right?
Yes, you got it, John. Corinne.
Okay, I thought so. Okay, so tell me what you mean by that. Can I comment on the
Oh,
plugins? Do we need chat?
you mentioned plugins. I haven't used any plugins yet with ChatGPT.
Yes. Yes.
So are they available only on 4, or can you use them?
Correct.
Okay.
Only on 4. And this prompt strategy that I'm teaching right now can only work on 4. It does not work on 3.5.
All right,
okay.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. It's so worth the $20. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, I'm totally with you. I have no hesitation at $20 a month for.
You ought to see some of the plugins that we've been playing around with.
Really?
And maybe that would be something that we could do
that'd be
in
a good
future
topic
shows.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get sidetracked if I start talking about plugins right now. So let me keep rolling. But anyway, yes, you have to use the plugin store. Yes, you have to upgrade. So anyway, here's what we got. All right. So now let's look at it differently. And I want to show you how I'm stacking stuff here. So here's the prompt that I've purged from this one. I just said, look, using context, data, and style, or use, hang on a second. Use context, data, and style to create content type. That's the prompt. These are all the variables though. And again, it looks complicated, but when you see the end result and how fast this really makes things go in your organization, it's far simpler. All right. So in context, I'm just going to be pasting the URL. All right. If I have my style down on how I want it to write, I don't ever have to tell it what style to write anymore. Right. And on the data side, I'm giving it more information. I'm saying, okay, this is a tweet. I want you to do 3 of them. And I want to limit it to 250 characters. And everybody knows that ChatGPT cannot count. All right, because it's trying to predict the next thing and it hasn't retroactively figured out what the numbers are. Now there's a plugin that they just created to create that they would count for you, but I haven't played around with it. But either way, I give it some frame of reference and it'll usually get within 20% high or low of that frame of reference. All right. So you don't have to use this. I'm just throwing it in there to keep it brief. Okay. Now I've added in here customer's perspective, because sometimes when you're writing a post or you're writing an email or you're writing a landing page or copy for a website, you want to know what that customer's perspective is so it can start to slant its writing in that direction. Same with the audience. I want to know who we're specifically targeting, and so it can call them out. I'm going to start to delete these one by one as we create this post so that you can kind of see the effect of these, because sometimes you don't need them, and in a tweet you probably don't. Over here, we have different things here. Directness. How direct is this going to be in terms of what we say? What's the level of humor? These, by the way, can be 1 to 5s or 1 to 10s. I have them as 1 to 10s, basically. You could write it like, 5 out of 10 if you wanted to, so it knows exactly where it lies in the scale. If you don't give it this, it's going to by default think it's 1 out of 10, with the exception of temperature. Okay, anybody who has ever played in the ChatGPT playground, which is what I call the back end of GPT, knows what temperature is. ChatGPT doesn't even know that you can use temperature on the front end. I asked it, how do you use temperature on the front end? It says, no, you can't. You can only use it in the playground. Okay, but I figured out how. This is actually how. So what temperature does is it tells ChatGPT, based on what you're giving me here, how creative do you want me to be around that? And if I tell it 0.1, and it only goes to 1, so it goes from 0 to 1. If I say 0.1, I'm basically telling it, pay close attention to all the information I have given you and just try to stay in your lane. On the other end, if I gave it a 1, it would get really creative. Okay. So I usually start with a 0.1, so it'll just pay attention to my instructions and it'll pay attention to these variables. But if I crank that up a notch, it'll get really crazy. It get really creative. So anyway, burstiness and perplexity are 2 other things that will get it to be really kind of interesting. I also will have a container for things I don't want it to do. All right. I should show you something. Have you ever tried to get ChatGPT to write an email for you? Anybody? Okay. Kevin's yet nodding his head. Anybody else?
Yes, I have.
Julian. All right.
Yes.
What's the number 1 line that it always starts out with 90% of the time when you tell it to write an email?
Hope this email finds you well.
Boom. Right. So I have to put in something to tell it, don't say that. I'm and then when you're asking it to create sales copy or anything like that, you're going to see it go infomercial on you. You're going to see it say stuff like, but wait, there's more, it just drives me crazy. So I have to have negative prompts, and they tell you try not to use negative prompts, but if you put it in a structure like this, ChatGPT can actually follow the negative prompts and not botch things up. Okay. So it's kind of interesting. So anyway, that's why I do this kind of stuff. All right. So just for giggles, and the hook level, the educational level, you could put intermediate and advanced, you could put whatever. I usually just go on a grade level. It'll understand whatever you want to put in there, but I'm typically writing, somewhere between 8th and 11th grade, trying to get it to be simple. I don't like it to get overly complicated, because when ChatGPT gets overly complicated, it doesn't sound human. It just sounds like somebody got a big dictionary out and was looking up stuff, and it's hard to make it sound like a real person wrote that. So I make it simple like that. Okay, so now I want you to watch the variations on this. So we're going to go back into GPT.
Hey, John,
make sure.
John.
Yes, ma'am.
John,
Talk to me.
there's a hook level question in the chat. Somebody wanted you
Oh,
to
okay. All right.
talk about that.
Tell me what that is. Read it while I find mine.
Okay, I will find it again. Boom, boom,
Okay, there we
boom.
go. What is hook level? Is that
What is hook level?
Yeah, okay. And it does that because of the preponderance of text that is used to train. Bob, tell me what you're talking about there.
Wasn't me, 2 different subjects. Somebody was asking about what is hook level, and I think it was because of one of your parameters, maybe.
Yeah, it is.
And
Yeah.
she was and I think the question there was, what does the hook level parameter control?
Gotcha.
What I was referring to is people were asking about the humor level, and what's humor level, and I was just making sure they understood that a lot of times this is in the language that's used to train these engines. You got to think about this in context of, okay, it goes out and it's read all the textbooks that talk about humor, and so when it reads those things, it builds its own logic based on those, what it is read, right? So, and the same thing for your email. You're saying when it always comes out with that same line on the email, again, because the preponderance of information that it was used to train it up, marketing and other people who generate emails for other people use those types of structures in the beginning of all their emails. So it learns this, and that's how bias actually creeps into these systems in a lot of ways. So, but the original question was what is hook level parameter? I think that's what somebody was asking. What is the hook really? What's that define? What is it used to control?
Gotcha. Yeah. So here's what I would say. First, if you have a question, y'all feel free to unmute and tell me, because I'm glad Kelly's watching the chat, but I'm not. But feel free to talk. Okay. I don't want to be the only one babbling here. But so hook level in direct response copy is, how do I hook the reader in to wanting to read more? And the higher that number is, the more it's going to try to zing you on the front end to hook you into reading. Okay.
So is that on a scale of 1 to 10, John, or is it a scale of 1 to 5?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
All of them, for me, by default, I just throw in a number, and so it knows it's 1 to 10. But if I were to change the scale, I can change the scale inside of my prompt by just telling it what the scale is.
I thought some of these metrics that you're sharing, like temperature, for example, were things that are part of ChatGPT itself versus the parameter sets you've identified.
Yeah. So here's what I've done. I have identified right at 35 different style points that you can control. And you don't need them all, but sometimes you do. Not all, but sometimes you need a few that you don't need in others. And I've just been playing around with it enough to know, all right, if I'm writing direct response copy, I might want a hook level in there and I might want to elevate it. I have to modify my prompt a little bit to tell it a little bit about how to engage those hooks. That gets really complicated, but there are several other parameters. There's directness. There's so many of them, it gets confusing. I was trying to get it really simple for this, but again, it all depends on what I'm trying to write. But in this particular case, I threw hook level in here just so you can see what happens when it's in and what happens when I dial it up or dial it back, okay, or delete it. Okay, so now.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Gotcha. Okay, so now I'm leaving these this way because it knows that's 1 out of 10. If I were to make it 3 out of 5, it's going to think it's 6 out of 10, and that's going to really elevate this. And so sometimes having that increment of 10, you'd be surprised how much it'll move the needle for ChatGPT when it starts to write. Okay. So now if I were to take this, y'all have any other questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm still a little lost. So did you have to train it what hook and humor and everything meant, or does it?
No. So good question, Art. So here's what I did. And I have a prompt for this also. I wanted it to analyze some text, and I wanted it to tell me how I could tell it how to write a different way. All right. So I literally took some text. I mean, I took Gary Halbert letters. I took all kinds of content, threw it in there. And I told ChatGPT, I said, I want you to analyze this, and I want you to turn it into a set of variables that I can control on my end. And so it did it. It was like, here are the variables. And every time I give it something else, I go, okay, well, here's another one. Here's another one. Like you could take books and have it do it, and it'll give you some variables, right? And so then once I had it give me those variables, then I would turn around, and this is the cool part. You can turn it around, leave the variables blank, tell it to go read the text and say, solve for these variables. Oh, wow. And it'll tell you what they are. And that was the crazy part for me. I was like, whoa, that's really cool. So now we call this brand voice DNA. I can take a series of articles or whatever from, let's say it's a if I don't know what business do you in, Art?
Personal spiritual development.
Okay. All right. So if you have a certain style that you like of somebody else when you're writing, and you say, I want to write like that person, you could literally turn around and have ChatGPT analyze that style using these variables. And then you can turn around and assign those variables to what you want next time you write, and it'll write like that person. As opposed to saying, I want you to write like Paris Hilton. We played that game the other day. I want you to write like Paris Hilton. ChatGPT 3.5 can't write as well as 4 will. 4 will write like freaking Paris Hilton, But if I were to take these prompts and analyze speeches that she's made, or films that she's made, or YouTube videos that she's made from the transcripts, it'll give me a code that I can then turn around and start writing like her. It's like a fingerprint. It's crazy. Wow. All right. Wow. So that's what this is. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
You bet. Okay. So now watch this. If I were to take that prompt and throw it in here, and again, you can kind of see what I've got in here. It's easier to see over here, which is why I always put it over here, because you just don't have enough room here to see what you're doing. So I'll pop it up here so I can show you. But With a hook level of 4, it's going to try to engage people. With a tone of casual and conversational, it's going to be basically the same that we put in the original prompt. The burstiness and perplexity is about how fast it's speaking and how complex almost it is in its word structures and its sentence structures. So I try to tone that down. Theoretically, if these are way high, it'll fool a AI detection system. But when you crank those things too high, yeah, it would fool them, because the AI detection system would say no human would write like that. No
Yeah.
AI is stupid enough to write like that. Yeah. So you got to crank them down a notch. Sometimes you can leave them out, but I've found that by dialing it down, I can dial ChatGPT down a notch. All right. And then over here, I'm saying this particular article is written for people who are trying to use ChatGPT. Now, I've given it a tone of a marketing executive seeking revenue growth and marketing assistance. May not be the case at all. And my audience would be SMB owners and marketers who are struggling to understand how to use AI. And again, I'm giving it another marketing bend over here, just because, you know, that's the voice that I speak from, right? If that's not the voice that you speak from, you would change the audience or delete this. Okay. So all of that is giving ChatGPT information about who I am, how I speak, and who I'm talking to. And then it's going to analyze this thing and say, all right, here's now how I'm going to write. Make sense? It's way more information than up here. All right, so let's just roll with it and see what we got. So look at the difference. It's got all these goofy emoticons in there, which I can't stand. You know, you can modify your prompt to tell it not to do that. But compared to this, let's kind of do a little side by side if we can. Okay. So this one clearly is trying to identify the audience. This one is not identifying the audience. So you can kind of see a big difference in how it's doing this. All right, so now another trick I'm going to tell you. If I were to just go in here and edit this and change these numbers, it would replace this, right? It would regenerate the text. If I were to paste it down here, start over and modify things, it would get foggy because it's also reading what it did up here. And so it's almost like you're putting, you know, more drops of red dye into a glass of clear water. It dilutes it a little bit, but it's not a fresh start. If you really want to get a fresh start, you either edit this or you start a new chat session. If you want it to have cumulative knowledge, then you would stack inside of this particular thread, or what do they call these things in ChatGPT world? Conversation. Yeah, conversation. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So just for giggles, I'm going to leave this one up here so that you can see what it looks like. And then if I were to go over here into a new chat, make sure I got it on, which I do. I'm going to paste the same prompt, but this time, let's do this. Let's take hook level, drop it to 1. We can take burstiness down to 1, perplexity down to 1. We could get rid of, how about we just get rid of the customer's perspective? And I might dial it up to 4. And, you know, because inside of your organization, if you say, look, I need 4 tweets every time, if you're the marketing director and you want somebody underneath you to give you 4 tweets, it's already there, right? So it's already there. Okay, so we'll do that and let's see the difference.
At least the emojis went away.
Yeah, so we got that going for me. And that's because I dialed these two things down and the hooks down. Dialing those down pulls out a lot of these weird things that it'll do. All right. But I want you to also notice something else that's unique about doing it this way versus this way. For some reason, it's giving me a link, and this one didn't. I don't know why.
That's
so
great.
by default, which is kind of critical.
That's important. It would seem it's important to have a link to what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this one gives you hashtags. This one gives you hashtags, but these hashtags are geared around my audience. These hashtags are geared around the article. Does that make sense? So I've changed the way it gives me information because I have given it more information. Okay, now, if I stripped out more or added more, I'm going to overwrite this one. Oh yeah, should we overwrite or should we just try a new one so you can compare? I'll do a new one. And what I'm going to do, just so there's nothing up my sleeve.
Just so I understand, John,
Yeah.
we can copy this into our own GPT and change the numbers, and it'll understand everything. We don't have to go and teach it anything.
No,
Okay.
You just change the numbers, and that's the idea. So look, just to show you how many prompts we have. So this is like a long form blog post prompt that we have, and you can see the prompt is massive, right? The pre-framing or the stacking ahead of it is fairly small. I used things like high here and moderate here instead of a numeric, but I have who's the author, what's my title, I'm writing a blog post, sections, words. So it has a different set. It's got intensity, data-driven, emotional storytelling, right? A whole different set of parameters inside of it. But when this thing writes, it's going to write a 1,500 word blog post, as opposed to a standard, 500 to 600 word post that you would get out of it. But it's very, very detailed. And what I would typically do is I would change this up here to give it my thoughts on the subject. So it would expand on it. And at least it knows what I'm thinking. Like if I read an article about something and I'm like, hey, here's some added stuff that I want to color on, I'll put that in there and it'll do it. Does it make sense? And we use Notion for our prompt library because it's just so easy to do. And we have these various categories in here. And so I'll have a filter for what kind of AI tool we're using. We'll give it some internal ratings as to whether it's any good. We'll have it in various stages, like if it's approved or we're testing it or we're under development or if it's published. What's the purpose, copywriting, email, whatever it might be. Here I have a filter. I have a search going on for blog, but if I would turn off blog, you can see I have all these other ones in here. Analyzing
John, I have a question. Is that automated?
Go for it.
This is fascinating. Is that automated, the status of your projects?
No,
Stage?
that's manual. That's
Okay.
manual. That's us. Yeah, we just go into it and we would change the status. We would decide whether it's a prompt or pre-prompt, what's it's for, etc. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but you can build this out to be whatever you need it to be in your organization, right? Whether you're a small organization or a big organization, if you're just a party of one, this is so helpful because every time you want to do something, you go, oh, wow, I forgot. I need to go do that. And so I'll pop up the prompt and paste it in there, modify it to what I need if I need, or I'll just rock. Most of the time, I've got it down to where I just paste it in here, throw in the URL, throw in some commentary, and it'll write it.
Can you give an example you were mentioning about changing the context with your thoughts? Could you just give an example of that? You just had that other page up a second ago.
Yeah, sure. So let's take, how about this? Let's paste this one in here, all right, which is the one we just did. And we got everything that we said. And this particular one is, let's see, let's just take, let's say we want it to look up this, and we're going to say, oh, shoot. I hate it when I do that. I hit the enter button. Let's go. How about we say, this is a great start, but there are more advanced methods. Maybe we, are there any, what other comments would you like to throw in here to see if it takes it?
So in this situation, what you're saying is, okay, this is a great start, but there are more advanced methods. For instance, you could do, 1, 2, 3 or something like that, and you would add that in. They would incorporate that into the writing.
That looks like a
Okay.
contradiction though, because you have style in the prompt and you're saying style parameters. I didn't understand that.
Well, so here's what we're doing here is we're giving ChatGPT context. The first context is, this is what I want you to look up, the URL. The second part of the context is, this is what I'm thinking about it. The style is in its own container. So we've already told ChatGPT to look at the stuff that's in these separate containers and then apply them. All right, now I don't know. Go ahead.
You could think of those style variables as tuning variables.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So don't think of them in terms of language, but think of them in terms of just tuning what the output's going to look like. What's John's saying is, okay, I'm going to give you the world reference, which are the URLs. I'm going to give you my view of those world references. That's his context that he's putting in place. And then he's telling the engine to say, okay, and I want you to tune your output based on these values and on these parameters to give me the type of, when he says, give me the voice that I want, he means the output that matches the way that I speak as a human being as closely as possible, as you can do that by using these parameters.
Yeah. And then up here, I'm just saying, I want you to add these thoughts to the thing. Okay. Now, it may be that I have to create this in a separate bucket, and I might just do that just for safety. And I might just call this,
you call anything, right? That's the point. You can,
yeah, exactly.
So this is the difficult part about this, kind of a you roll your own sort of
pretty
formatting,
much. Yeah,
right?
You roll your
He's
own.
just he's telling you that he's organized his interaction with ChatGPT using these functions, and some of them are actually a part of ChatGPT. But in this case, like he said, he's going to make a new section here called thoughts. He's going to want those thoughts to be injected into the output and not modified. You know what I mean? So there are ways to actually inject your actual statements into what's put out, and that's what he's talking about there.
Yeah. Now,
whether it put thoughts in there.
Yeah, whether it can do that inside of 250 characters, Josh, I don't know. So if it doesn't, I'll change this from a tweet to a LinkedIn post. Okay.
Yeah. So you can think about this as like
next.
you're building a gun. You're building a gun by saying, I want the trigger to be this size. I want the hammer to be this size. I want the firing pin to be this size. And then you just kind of hope it hits the target when it fires, right? I mean, it really is sort of like that.
But once you get it, then it becomes the rubber stamp formula, and that's what I like about it. It may take you a little bit of time the first time. It may take you 10 minutes the first time, but the second time it's literally cut, paste, go, right? And that's why I call it a scalable prompt, because inside your organization, once you've mastered it once, it's ridiculously fast. Like we spent, I don't know, last week, I spent the better part of 16 hours creating a series of 10 prompts to create a really cool marketing plan and strategy for a client. All right. The second client I had to do it for, instead of it taking 16 hours, it took 2.5
16 minutes. Yeah, I was gonna
Right,
say,
right.
yeah.
Took
Well,
what?
the thing that took the time was I had to cut and paste into a
Yeah.
document so that I could deliver it to the client. But it used to take me 3 to 4 weeks to do that, right? Then I boiled it down to 8 hours. Then I boiled it down to 2.5. You know, that's the way.
So
you
in
can
other
scale
words, charge
using
your
this.
charge your fees based on the project, not on your time.
That's correct.
Well, that's right.
That's right.
You know, I mean, because hey, the value hasn't changed, right? Just because it
That
took
was
me 1 hour.
tongue in cheek, but
Oh yeah, no, I know, but you got the idea, right? Where it's really about the value. And so if I'm bringing a client $1 million worth of value, I'm not going to charge them $1.50, you know, just
Yeah.
because it took me 10 seconds. So anyway, all right, so here we go. We got this. I'm gonna now that I have this edited up, and we're gonna keep it as a tweet, and we've added our thoughts. Let's see what it actually generates. See if it throw our thoughts in there.
Yeah, this is a fun part.
See, kind of got confused, right? Here's a tip: use advanced methods, and it dropped the URL.
and it added the emojis.
Yeah,
Well, you had
it
that,
threw back
yeah,
that.
he had that old, you still had that old parameter in there, right, at the set at this high level, I believe. No, it was adjusted. Never mind.
No. I think what happened is this constraint of characters is like, I got to let something go. I'm going to let the URL go. All right. So it probably
Oh,
did
yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah. Okay. So, but it tried to squeeze that voice in there. Now, you already saw what it did if I don't have that. And that was the only change that we made. It's got all this stuff in here. Now, if I were to go back over to this particular prompt, and I were to say that this is a,
Yeah, that's because tweets are very constraining because of the character count. So it's going to do some
right.
it's going to do some hard decisions based on that character
Yeah.
count. Yeah.
And I'm not going to give it a character limit here. I'm just going to let it rock. All right. So now let's see what it says. Here are 4 posts.
Yeah, you'll notice it didn't even minify the URL this time. That's it.
Yeah.
You see that it minified the URL before, but that was because it was
Yeah,
kind
you're
of
right.
constrained by the character count. Now it gives you the full URL.
Mhm. You know, again, I'm using a really small example because I don't want it writing a 500-word
Yeah.
blog post every time we go through the exercise, but you kind of get the idea here. This becomes really, really powerful in the organization. Again, if I showed you some other examples of where we're doing things like Archie, I know Archie puts out a lot of direct mail stuff, and he's got a certain style to that direct mail, which is kind of emulating a J. Abraham type process. You could use this to get even tighter with what you're writing and create more.
John, scroll up to the output. Scroll up to the output. So the other thing that I always find really interesting is you need to really look and observe what it is that it's putting out, because it's using an engine that's been trained over so much volume of information. So the fact that it uses icons at the beginning of that sentence, although in your mind you may think that, okay, well, I don't really get that, what's it doing? It's because it knows that the effective output for this type of response includes those in it, and it's doing that based over a really large data set, as opposed to the perspective that we may have as individuals, because we don't really we never use that, and that's never been a tactic that we've used in our writing. So when you ask it to do something, it's interesting to notice the specifics about how it does it, just like that minification of the URL versus the full URL. It did that for a reason, right? It did that because you constrained it earlier with characters, but it still felt the URL was important. Here it says, yeah, the URL is important to include, but we can spell it out now because I've got the freedom to do that. So even the way it puts things out teaches you something about the way about the information that it's consumed and its perspective. You got to think of it from its perspective. From its perspective, based on everything that it's seen, this is what it would do. So it doesn't mean you need to change the way you do things, but it does kind of clue you into what's a popular trend maybe that you might not be familiar with.
Yeah,
Okay.
you nailed it with that last comment. It's what's a popular trend. It's not what's effective. right?
Right.
And that's the problem.
That's
that
why
I
they
have.
hire you.
Right.
John, I
Right.
have a question here, and because it just prompted me to ask this question because it's a LinkedIn prompt in this instance.
Go ahead.
Now, can it go out and put an image with this? You know, in LinkedIn, I think it's very effective where there's
No.
virtually any kind of image. Okay, so you
Yeah.
put that in
No
manually and then
is the
copy
short
paste the
answer.
type.
Right.
That was actually my question actually very similar to that, because well, we all know that GPT is not really, you know, like for images at this point, but what a lot of businesses they've tried before is they use ChatGPT. They can analyze images though, like, you know, they let ChatGPT like read it and give you some suggestions on, you know, for example, how to generate a very effective thumbnail. So my question was actually is because I've tried it before and saw some like examples on the internet before, like it can read, like, you know, give you some basic suggestions of how to build like effective, like attractive, you know, thumbnail, like, you know, for example. So my question here is that, you know, have you tried using this type of prompts, you know, like to let them give you more like specific type of feedback so that you can use this as a guidance to create different type of images? Like, do you think this would be also be applicable?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's what we use. In fact, when one of our blog post prompts, what we have it doing at the end of the prompt after it's written it is we have what we call a follow-on prompt. And the follow-on prompt says, okay, based on that, recommend 3 types of images that I could use, and then create the prompt inside of Midjourney for those. And then we turn on the photorealistic plugin inside of the plugin store, and it'll create that prompt. Now, photorealistic does a fairly decent job, but it's kind of over-engineered, right? But at least it gives you the concept. So I have it telling me, give me a description of what an image might be if we were going to do it in Dolly and then in Midjourney. And again, sometimes it creates something that's so complicated, you're like, it'll never do that. But it gives you the idea, right? And then you just strip it down to what you need. And
I
then
think
you can
simplified.
go into Midjourney and create it.
The rainbow with the elephant in the room, man.
Right.
Maybe you don't need the rainbow.
So I'll give you an example. Like I would say, for instance, these meetings that we have, I was like, all right, I want you to create an image around the CXO roundtable where we're going to be discussing AI topics. And it would come up with these flowery concepts. Okay, I want you to do this that's going to symbolize this, you know, and you know, Midjourney's going, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So it's like it's talking to me and says, okay, this picture should symbolize this. But when you throw that into a prompt, it just is a chocolate mess. But on the other end, if you just say, hey, I want a picture of a person, the back view of a person working on a Mac laptop. I want to use this camera lens with that camera angle with this kind of lighting, and I want a desk over here. It could do it. So that's what I always have it do. It is a follow-on prompt where I have it read what we just wrote and then say, give me some ideas for images. And I can either go find them or have them generated with AI. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So anyway, the more you play around with this, the better it gets. And I know we're kind of closing in on 0 hour. So I want to make sure that I didn't just overcomplicate it, that I confuse the hell out of y'all. Does everybody, does it make sense? Do you see opportunities for this, or do you want to visit it again next week and we can fine tune some of your own? What would you think?
There's so much to this. We could spend forever talking about it. Just even the parameters, like when you said you found 35, like a list of those parameters and what they really kind of do, that'd be worth a conversation, you know. And use the same prompt, but just mess with the parameters for a few times, you know, a couple places, and actually see what the effect of that is. That would be a really good discussion.
Yeah, no, it is very helpful.
John, I dropped a URL. If people want to use an AI tool to do video, because these AI tools go on and on and on. As John's talking, John could spend days talking about just the plugins in this one AI tool, and there are like hundreds of AI tools coming out, right? But this you can take a look at Pictory. You can use ChatGPT to build you a script for a video that you can use on your LinkedIn post. Use Pictory, and it'll build the video for you with voiceovers, very realistic voiceovers and everything else. So between the two of those, you can create a full program without, with video links to videos that are created from the prompts you created inside of ChatGPT and build an entire program yourself.
I might even play with it with this one, but you can upload a video to Vidyo, VIDYO, and it will carve it up into segments that you could use inside of YouTube Shorts or inside of TikTok or inside of Instagram Reels. It's amazing, and you can do all that with AI. Now you can also expand it, because a lot of times it doesn't quite crop perfectly, but you can just say, okay, really, I need to include these 2 more seconds because that's where the point actually ends. Descript is another one.
Yeah, I use that one. I use that one. I put my videos in it. It gives me a transcript. Then I load the transcript into ChatGPT and say, give me a script for a slide deck, and it'll just reverse engineer the whole thing. That's another really good one.
Can you rephrase that? You said Descripts?
Yeah.
Okay.
DESCRIPT. I think it's
great tool.
.com. Is it .com or is it
hang on,
AI?
I'll have to type it in my. Let me type it.
Yeah,
Descript.com.
It has a lot of great editing functionality and stuff too, where you can change what you said. And I wanted to mention with you can get, if you have Photoshop, there's Photoshop beta now.
Right.
You can do AI images, and they claim that they're original, that they're not scraped. So I don't know if it's true, but for copyright reasons, and you can do some very interesting things with it.
I've been playing with that all week. And it's a blast. I've been doing some in fact, it's helped me do some things for like motion graphics for illustrated Adobe Illustrator. I've used it, and I've used that beta for motion graphics and helped create some stuff that I used to have to do in After Effects, but it's very slick. So
have you played around with Adobe's Firefly?
Yeah.
Or are you just talking about inside of Photoshop?
No, I mean, there's about a half a dozen things that came out on Adobe all at one time, right? So they're building that back end into all of their tools. So Firefly you're right, is a standalone thing, but they also have this new beta out that's a standalone beta that's really cool.
I've been using that, and it's cool. You can play stuff, clean up stuff. Firefly is more like a image generator, but it's all it's all pretty amazing. So anyway, I appreciate everybody hopping on today. If you have any thoughts for next week, feel free to email them to me. And Jillian, I saw you talking about copy AI. Yeah, we've used that for quite a while. There are a couple of new tools coming out. We could talk about that. If nobody's ever played around with Anthropic's what's that one called, Claude? It writes some really good ad copy, so it does a good job. You can't use this kind of framework inside of its prompting engine because it's already kind of narrowed down, but it's really fast. It does a nice job with copywriting, so you can check that one out as well. I just kind of for this particular session, I wanted to focus on one technique for helping you scale up prompts if you're going to stick around with ChatGPT. Because of all these plugins it adds. But if y'all want to look at a video editor or something like that, we could do that. Or if you want to explore these particular variables next time, or you have any other thoughts, what do you want to see next time? Anything?
I would love a list of, as Bob asked, a list of those style parameters that you found and what they mean. That would be awesome.
Gotcha. Okay. I broke them into 2 buckets. Originally, they all came in one giant bucket, but then I realized some of them are numeric in nature and some of them are descriptive in nature. So I had to create 2 different things for them. So that would be something that takes a lot of energy. So we'll talk about that maybe next time.
Thank you, John. I know you put a lot of work and time into this, and
Thank you.
Yeah.
We really
Great
appreciate
stuff.
it.
Thanks,
Yeah, you
John.
bet.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Hopefully it was
Much
helpful.
appreciated.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll catch you next time.